Hello everyone. Hello everyone and welcome to this lecture on Stoicism. My name is Lenja Slierendrecht and I work for Studium Generale and we organize lectures like today, but many other events as you could have seen on the slides behind me. But today we're going to talk about Stoicism. Focus on what you can control, not on the things you cannot change. The lessons of classic Stoic philosophers have regained popularity over the past few years. From famous athletes to successful CEOs, many swear by the writings of Seneca and Marcus Aurelius. But why? How is it that such an old philosophy resonates in modern times? And how can one become a Stoic themselves? Dr. Michiel Buis received his PhD here at Erasmus School of Philosophy on contemporary application of ancient Stoicism. He now works as a researcher at Breda University of Applied Sciences, focusing on the ethical dimensions of sustainability. And he is committed to building bridges between the philosophical practice and theory. Give him a warm hand of applause, Dr. Michiel Buis.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, first of all, for being here, because I know that Feyenoord also plays a match tonight, so I almost wasn't here myself, but I thought, yeah, it might be handy that I am here, so thank you for that. And actually, we're going to talk about a philosophy that has a lot in common with the football club Feyenoord. Right, so you know that they're about deeds, not words, and that's almost literally that one of the famous Stoic philosophers, Seneca, also wrote down. Our philosophy, Stoic philosophy, is about deeds, not about words. All right, so before I am going to start, I actually want to ask you something, and luckily I can see the audience here. Are there people here who identify as a Stoic, or who say like, okay, I'm trying to be Stoic? Don't be afraid. Yeah, quite a lot actually. I see about 15 hands there. Are there people who came in here and said, Stoicism, what is that? Yeah? Also, don't be afraid. Okay. Very good. So that just so I know what kind of audience we have here. What I'm going to talk about today is Stoicism is popular nowadays again. If you go to the philosophy department of a bookstore, you will see Stoicism a lot in there. Sometimes almost exclusively Stoicism. That's how popular it is nowadays. And I want to talk about how come, but also a question that a lot of people ask me is, but is that actually Stoicism? You know, it's an old philosophy dating back to 300 BCE. So it's 2,300 years old. Are they really doing Stoicism there, or is it just something else? So I hope that this question interests you, because otherwise you're stuck here for quite a bit, actually. So that's what I'm going to talk about. So this is hopefully what we're going to be doing. So first of all, I will introduce you to Stoicism, especially for those people who have never heard of Stoicism. What is it actually? Then we're going to compare the old Stoicism, the Roman Stoicism especially, with the modern day Stoic books that you find in the bookstores. And when we have done that comparison, there will be differences, just as a spoiler already. Then I want to talk about, okay, now that we know the differences and that maybe modern day Stoicism isn't quite the same as ancient Stoicism, is that bad or not? Well, we will see. But if you want to be a Stoic, how could you do that in a way that is faithful to the old philosophy? That is part 3, how to be a Stoic, living in harmony with nature. That's an important topic. And no, we're not going to be talking about climate change here. Lastly, I hope that we can maybe have a look at some Stoic exercises. Like I said, Stoicism is about action. It's not about talking all of the time, and that's why it's a bit contradictory that I'm standing here, because I am going to talk about it all of the time, but actually it's a philosophy about doing things. And so there are a lot of exercises for Stoics to be working on. And I've been told that probably you might have some questions at the end, or some comments, or some disagreements with me. That's all very welcome. We can talk about that later. Also, by the way, if I'm talking about something here and you really feel the urge to say something, please do. Okay, philosophy or Stoic philosophy is also a philosophy of dialogue, of talking with each other. And so if something doesn't make sense, or if I'm going too fast, if it doesn't make sense, then probably you're not the only one thinking that, so please do come forward with that. Okay, so first, an introduction to Stoicism. Okay, so here you have some example of a bookstore and what there is to see on Stoicism. There's a lot of Stoicism in here, actually. So you can see in here, The Obstacle is the Way is a very famous modern Stoic book. We'll talk about it later. But you can see it everywhere. But how come? Why is it there? That was actually the question that I had back in 2012, I think, when there were 1 or 2 books in there about Stoicism. And that was when I did my master's on philosophy, and I said, well, that's a good master's thesis, to compare those 2 or 3 books on Stoicism, who say, like, okay, Stoicism is actually really relevant for the modern times, to compare that with the ancient philosophy. Okay, so back then, maybe some of you know the names. It was Jules Evans who wrote a book back then, Bill Irvine. Those were the first who were talking about Stoicism. So in 2012, 2013, that was when the first books, recent books on Stoicism, and especially on the modern day application of Stoicism, were there. Okay, so I did that, and then I went off to teach philosophy at a high school, and during that time, more and more Stoic books came out. So when we were in like 2017, it was all over the place, really. It was like it is still nowadays. Almost everything in the philosophy department was Stoicism. So I reached out to my professor and I said, like, shouldn't I do another research on that? And he agreed, luckily. And so I finished that about a year ago and defended that in the beginning of this year. Just researching, okay, this modern day Stoicism, what is that about? Okay, before we do that, I want to talk about a few points that we do need to consider when we compare modern day Stoicism with ancient Stoicism. The first one is, and we will keep coming back to those points as well. The first one is the cultural historical context. What does that mean? We are embedded in a culture, in a history, in our modern day society, just as the ancient Stoics were as well. Right, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, I will say the names, maybe some of you know them, Epictetus, they all wrote in Rome in the first centuries of our common age. And they were embedded in a society. And some of those things that they were embedded in, we just don't recognize anymore, or we don't understand anymore. So for them, it was completely normal to think that time went in cycles, for example. Well, we see it as linear now. Okay, so when we read something and they are talking about time, we naturally do it with the things that we think about nowadays. And so it takes some reconstruction sometimes to understand what they're really saying. And as we will see in modern day Stoicism, this doesn't always go right. Secondly, what we need to think about is that the ancient Stoics, that their corpus, that their books, that the works that we have is very limited. And I mean very, very, very limited. So the 3 writers I talked about just now, they are basically the only 3 writers that we have works from. 2 of them just 1 work. Seneca, we have quite a lot actually from him. But they were writing when Stoicism was already 300 years old. 300 years of development of Stoicism, 300 years of theory they were leaning on, 300 years of assumptions that they had in their work that we don't know, and where we have no work whatsoever from. Okay, so everything before that is lost except for fragments where other authors maybe quoted something that an older Stoic said. Okay, so we have to do a lot of interpretation actually. we often just don't know exactly what they meant with certain things that they were talking about, because for them it was like, yeah, of course, we know that. Chrysippus, one of the earlier Stoics, he talked a lot about this. He wrote several books about this, so everybody knows. I don't need to explain, but yeah, for us, they actually do, because we don't have those works anymore. Thirdly, what we need to think about is, I have analyzed modern-day Stoicism, like I said, like 2015, 2016, it became popular. It's just a philosophy of now 10 years old. And I was comparing it with a philosophy that lasted for 500 years, that had the time to develop. Right? Maybe the first Stoics, they were not quite as sophisticated as it was later, maybe. Right? And with that, I'm giving some hints on how I see modern Stoicism, right? It doesn't have that depth yet of ancient Stoicism. Okay? But we need to know that, yeah, it's just most of what I was analyzing was just in 5 years that it came to the rise again. So, we need to bear with them a little bit. Lastly, each philosophy has some growing insights. If we think about when Stoicism ended, because it pretty much ended after Marcus Aurelius. I mean, there were some Stoic philosophers, but Christianity became really important after that. Stoicism was like a mix between religion and philosophy, you could say. But Christianity became way too important. So Stoicism pretty much died out. Christianity also took a lot of insights from Stoicism and incorporated it into them. But yeah, now we're talking about it again 2,000 years later, 1,800 years later. And if we look at Christianity, for example, it has often adapted to newer times. It has nuanced their viewing points. It has grown with the centuries. But Stoicism wasn't able to do that. So when you are a modern-day Stoic, and you're going to look at Seneca again from 2,000 years ago and interpret that, yeah, there will be a big gap between societies. It didn't have the time to gradually evolve. So there are some strange things happening there. It didn't evolve as naturally as Christianity, for example, did. So those are some things we need to think about. It's not that easy, even though some modern-day Stoics say, like, yeah, Stoicism, you can implement it in our daily lives from second one. Well, that's not what is actually the case. Okay, a bit more in depth to modern-day Stoicism. So when I was doing this research, I noticed, like, okay, you can pretty much group those modern-day Stoic books. Maybe you recognize some of them. So you see here, top right, The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. I already talked about it. Then you have Stand Firm from Sven Brinkman. Then you have How to be a Stoic by Massimo Pigliucci. Here you have Donald Robertson with How to Think Like a Roman Emperor. The Little Book of Stoicism, Jonas Salzgeber. And the Dutch ice skater Mark Tuitert, he wrote The Stoic Mindset. Okay, so those are some of the really popular modern-day Stoic books. And like I said, there are some categories in that. So let me explain, because it might help you if you read a modern-day Stoic book, like, okay, where can I place this actually? Okay, so the first one is advice philosophy. And what those modern-day Stoics usually do is they take a few quotes from ancient Stoicism, and they build a book around those quotes. And usually they're very practical, immediately applicable, like the one, like, okay, think for yourself, what is in my power and what is not. And, well, they write something about it, like, okay, you don't lose energy if you keep thinking about things that you can't control anyway. And then they go to some others. I know Mark Tuitert has one who says, like, win by not thinking about winning. Because if you don't think about it, you will spend your energy better. It's those kinds of books. So usually what happens is that it starts with, well, just like this, 10 principles of Stoicism. So they take 10 quotes that they like, and then say, this is Stoicism, you can work with it, it's very practical. Usually you get some exercises you can do, and that's it. Okay? Of course, this is useful if you don't know Stoicism. This is really useful if you have some pointers towards, but yeah, as you can imagine, it's not the most philosophical kind of books. It's It's usually people who don't like philosophy who say like, yeah, that's when I like philosophy actually. Okay, the second one is therapy philosophy, therapy Stoicism. By the way, the advice philosophy would also count for Ryan Holiday, I would say, for those who read that, and also for Jonas Salzgeber. Then we go to therapy philosophy, and that is Donald Robertson. He is a psychiatrist, actually. And we have some in the Netherlands as well. Maybe some of you know Mirjam van Rijen. She's also writes about Stoicism. She's also in the therapy corner. And what does that mean? They are trying to, if you are worried about your thoughts, if you somehow don't manage to do things the way you want to do, you can use Stoicism to think sanely again. Okay, so this is usually if you are in trouble or if things don't go the way you want to, then Stoicism can help you. And then it's often about, okay, research your own thinking. And again, it's almost always it goes back to what is in your control and what is not. And then they're like, okay, are your thoughts effective about what you're thinking about now? You're worrying a lot. But can you actually do something about it? No, you can't do something about it. Then change your thinking. Right? So it's always about changing your thinking. Okay, so then it becomes a kind of therapy. There are actually really famous therapies who say that they are influenced by Stoicism. Right? So the cognitive therapy is influenced by Stoicism, as well as behavioral therapies. So some of the biggest therapies around now used by psychiatrists, the founders of them said, okay, we are actually influenced by Stoics. Right? And so one of the famous quotes that is used here is, it's not the things that happen to us that upset us, but the way we think about those things that upset us. Right? Think about that. I think that there is a huge truth in that. Things just happen, but the way we think about it, that is what upsets us, because we think about it probably in the wrong way, would the Stoics say. Third one is life philosophy, and that would be Massimo Pigliucci, and they are trying to get, it's also kind of advice philosophy, but it's more about apply to every part of your life, not just advices that you can use sometimes, but try to implement it. Right? And so then it comes a bit closer to ancient Stoicism, because that is a life philosophy for sure. It's a way of living. And lastly, there's an odd one out. It's what I would call protest Stoicism, and that's what Sven Brinkman is. I would categorize him under that. We also have a Dutch writer. She's a really interesting one. She's called Riemke Wiersma, and she actually wrote before all of the others who wrote about Stoicism in 2012. I actually missed her back then. And she's a children's book writer, and she also wrote a book about Stoicism. And she uses it as a way to protest against our society, basically, about the way we do things, because Stoics actually do things differently. She argues that Stoicism is a very left-winged philosophy, but often, maybe some of you have heard it, that Stoicism is also used in very conservative, right-wing areas. So I think what that already says, and so we will talk about it more, is that it's actually not that political. Back in the days when Seneca was living, he was an advisor for the emperor back then, for Emperor Nero. But the opposition was also called the Stoic opposition. So they were on both sides. And I think that can be applied to nowadays as well. It's not a political philosophy. We'll see that. All right, so those are the types of modern Stoic books that you can encounter. And of course, it's not that when one book is an advice book that they can't have any therapy in there or something. It's more like ideal types, right? Then to classical Stoicism. So it was founded in 300 BCE by a philosopher called Zeno. First it was called Zenoism, but because he was always teaching at the painted porch, which is a stoa poikile in Greek, it was called Stoicism later. That's something that often happens, like the Academy of Plato, and for Aristotle as well. It's always named after where they were teaching. Okay, so there were 3 periods, and we only know something about the late Stoa. There was the Roman Stoa. So the early Stoa was in Greece. Then you had the middle Stoic philosophy who changed their philosophy a bit. We know a bit about it, but for now it's not that relevant. They were residing in Rhodos, so somewhere else. The first one were in Athens, then it went to Rhodos, and then it went to Rome. Right? And that is the area or the time period where all of the modern Stoics, they always refer to the late Stoa. And the reason is very simple, because those are the works that we have, right? The other ones, yeah, you can try to reconstruct, but it's really easy to read Seneca because his books just survived. And they are translated everywhere. All of the works from Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius are translated in Dutch as well. It's widely available. So that is why they're going towards them. There's also a different reason why late Stoicism is very popular, because the ethics became more and more important. So the early Stoics, they were talking about physics, for example. So about, okay, how did our world begin? How does it work? Right? Natural science, they were talking a lot about that. And about logic. Like, okay, when is an argumentation valid? And like really abstract, like A and A plus B equals C and stuff like that. They were doing that as well. Like this old logic type of things. Later on, the Stoics said more and more like, okay, yeah, it's nice to know how the world actually works, but it's actually more important to know how to live a good life. So it is important to study nature. We already saw living in harmony with nature. It is important to study nature, but especially because through studying nature you can see how you can live a good life. Okay, so the main goals is living a well-reasoned, virtuous life in accordance with nature. And again, we will talk about it later, what that exactly means. And 2, achieving tranquility, in Greek ataraxia, through mastery of passions and alignment with reasons. Yeah, I haven't mentioned passions yet. I did that on purpose because when you talk about Stoicism, everyone thinks like, okay, you can't have any emotions, you need to suppress them, stuff like that. Yeah, it's a bit more nuanced like that, but yeah, you are right if you think that they are not that happy with if you live completely by your passions. They say like reason needs to have an important role. Okay, so this as a general introduction to Stoicism. Let's then go to the comparison. Okay, so the 3 domains that I already mentioned, physics, ethics, and logics in classical Stoicism. What the late Stoics did, so the Roman Stoics that we are talking about, they said like, okay, physics, logics is actually not that important. We translate it into what I call areas of attention. So we need to pay attention to the things that we learn from physics, right? So that's what I said. Natural study is important, but as long as it leads to living a better life. And actually studying nature, the most important thing that we learn is, again, that there are things that are in our control and that are not in our control. And so it means that we need to think about what we desire. Do we desire things that are in our control, or do we desire things that are not in our control? And the Stoics, they were pretty rigorous about what we can and cannot control. Because the only thing that we really can control is our own mind, our own thoughts, our own strivings. Everything else is out of our control. Okay, so I may have a good intention, but it can always be frustrated by something, and we don't have that in our control. So the only thing that we should desire is to be a good person. If you desire that, then nothing can stop you from living a happy life, because you get all that you desire, because everyone can be a good person. Okay, so if you strive for wealth, yeah, that's not in your control. You can do everything you want, you can do for it. You can spend your whole life trying to get rich, but you still might fail. And even if you manage to do it, you might get robbed. Or you might marry the wrong person who spends all of your money. Right? So wealth is not in your power. If you strive for that, then probably at some point in your life you're bound to be unhappy. Unless you're lucky, but yeah, living your life based on being lucky, I mean, when you can also live your life on a well-reasoned manner, that you're always happy, that's not the way to go. And the same goes for a number of things that they mention. If you strive for status, yeah, that's not in your control. You can do everything to be a reputable person, but the way others think about you is not in your control. So don't strive for that. What you can strive for is being a good person. Fame, same thing. Right? You get the idea, right? It's only in your own mind that you can be happy. So maybe you've heard of things like, you know, there is a book, and there is actually a book about that from the 70s by James Stockdale, who was being held in Vietnam for 7 years in a prison there. And he said, because of Stoicism, I survived, and I actually could be happy there. Okay, and this is the most, I mean, I don't know how he did that, and I don't know if it's actually true, what he wrote afterwards. But he said, you know what? Being tortured, I mean, that was not in my control. What was in my control was what I was thinking. The ancient Stoics, they actually say about that, they say like, okay, you know, someone can control everything of you, but they can't take the victory from you, because the victory is when they break you inside. If you don't do that, then you're actually the true victor, right? So maybe you see now also, it's also used a lot in the army, for example, Stoicism, because of this way of thinking. Okay, but that's an extreme example. I'm not going to ask you to be happy while you're being tortured, but you can implement it, of course, in small things of your life, where you get really angry about something, then take a step back and think like, okay, is it justified that I'm angry about this? Was this unfair? What can I do about it? Right? What kind of person do I want to be? Do I want to be this angry person or not? Yeah? So this is the first one, the area of attention. You see, it's all about the self. That changes when we talk about ethics, and they are changing that again to, okay, what can I do in my life? And they are talking about intention there. Okay, so we now see like, okay, what is in your power and what is not? Well, what is not in your power, or what is in your power, is your own thoughts, but what are actually the right thoughts to have? What is the right intention to have? And then they're saying, okay, if you think about it, we're all here together, so we need to think about how can I be a good part of this universe? Okay? So they say everything happens for a reason. Well, I don't know if that is, but that is something that the Stoics said. Nothing happens just because it happens. And so if that is true, then it is reasonable what is happening. Everything is reasonable what happens. And that is why we need to take part in that reason. So we need to be reasonable ourselves. Okay, so now we get a bit to why passions are bad, because you are going against the order of nature. Okay, so even if we totally don't understand ourselves why it is happening for a reason. Why? Because everything needs to grow, everything needs to perish. That is how nature works, because things perish so that other things can grow. And so it is part of these laws of nature that are happening, that are in the end working towards something good. And the last one is logics. And logics, it is also the end of what you could say the Stoic education. Okay, so you start by managing your desires. That's the starting point. Then you're going to expand a bit and say like, okay, I want to be a good person for everyone, yes?
In the one before, you mentioned harmony and I can see collaboration.
Yeah.
Hierarchy, you didn't say anything about.
Yeah, all right, okay, yeah, very good, yeah. So you're saying, I talked about harmony and collaboration, but not about hierarchy. Yes, so they say we are born to work together and everyone has their place in it. And so that is indeed important to mention, because that is something really of that time, right? So Roman society was very much focused on the army. Everyone had their place. And so they said, don't try to be someone you are not, but you have your own role in this world. Try to be the best at that role. Yeah, so that might be something that might not appeal that much because, yeah, it might also be that you have to be the best slave in the world. Don't try that you have to become something else. Okay? Maybe it is good to say a bit about that. It's not that they say that slavery is good. They say, yes, slavery is bad. Seneca actually says that. But he says, while it is the case right now, you can become really unlucky or unhappy that you are a slave, or you can say, I want to change this, but from now, I'm not going to let this affect me. Even though, yes, harmony, everyone is valuable, everyone is part of this reasonable world, so everyone is equal, but don't let it affect you now. So they say you can be a revolutionary, let's put it like that, but don't let it affect you too much. Accept what is there, and then try to change it. Okay. Do you want to, I saw a hand, no? Okay. Lastly then, the logics. So the question there is, what do I agree to? It's about judgment. When can you make a judgment? And it's strange that we're talking about judgment at the very end of Stoic education. So we're talking about desires first. You're going to try to have the right desires. Then you're going to try to think in benevolence, let's put it like that, into wanting the best for others, for everyone. And only then you can make your own judgments. Something that we would normally start with, right? So first we're going to make judgments and then we're going to go on. What they're saying is, if you start with judgments, then your judgments are actually clouded still by the wrong desires. So you can't look at something objectively because you have the wrong desires. You have emotions flowing through you who are going to decide what your judgment is. You need to do it without that. And you don't have the benevolence towards others yet when you're judging. You're not looking at it from the bigger picture, from what is good for all of us. So if you're doing judgments without that, then they're really unreliable. You can only do that later on. And it's a bit of, especially for modern Stoics, it's a bit of a conflict. Well, they don't think about those kind of things, by the way, modern Stoics. They just say, like, okay, put your own judgment on it. But if you would do this nowadays, it's a bit difficult because you need to follow a philosophy where they say, you know, don't judge yet if it's correct what we're saying, do it first. Because if you're now saying, like, yeah, get rid of emotions, yeah, that's nonsense, then they say, like, yeah, that's because you're still full of emotions. You first need to get rid of them, and then you can think about it in a reasonable, clear manner, and then you will see, indeed, emotions are really useless to have, and they're actually going to the wrong direction. There's a lot of bad coming from that. Okay, so judgment is only there for the ones who are advanced in Stoicism, who don't have those emotions yet, who do have the right desires, who are thinking in benevolence. Not for the ordinary layman. By the way, layman, the Greek word for layman that the Stoics were using was idiotes. So I'm not saying I'm in a room full of idiots, but... Okay, modern Stoicism then. So let's go back to those attention areas. Let's see how far I am. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, so we will get to that a bit later as well, but I will tell you a bit about it. So physics is the main thing that Stoics learn from nature is this dichotomy of control, what we call that. So they say if you look into nature, you will see that things happen whether you want it or not. Okay, so we need to learn something from that. If we look at nature, there's a book by Seneca, it's called The Questiones Naturales, Natural Questions, and he's doing physics there actually. And he always ends with an ethical epilogue. And he says, for example, we have the seas, the winds, that's a better example. So he was studying the winds, and he has some interesting but very outdated scientific study about the winds. Then he ends ethically and he says, like, we use the winds the wrong way, because what do we do with the winds? We are building sailing boats, and we're going to distant shores, and we're taking things from there, and we make war with others when we meet different civilizations. But actually, the winds are there to carry the seeds, to carry the fruits, so that we have enough food for ourselves and that we don't have to fight war with each other. So we need to learn from nature, and we need to correctly interpret nature, and we need to study what nature is trying to tell us. Then we can live a good life and not abuse nature in this kind of way. Okay, so that are some of the ways that they're doing. If you're interested in this, definitely read the Questiones Naturalis. It's a really underrated book. It's almost read by no one, but I think it's really a really important Stoic book. So if you want to do that, then get that one. Okay, then modern Stoicism. Modern Stoicism doesn't see philosophy as a life philosophy, but especially as a tool, right? So we see now that ancient Stoicism, it's really a way of living. It's a way that you are doing things. If you are a Stoic, you are a Stoic in every fiber of your soul. But for modern Stoics, Stoicism is usually a tool, something that you can help sometimes if you're stuck, if you want to beat the competition, if you want to become more successful at something, you can use some Stoic principles. Okay, so that's a really different way of approaching Stoicism and philosophy in general. Okay, so how do they deal with those attention areas? So when we talk about desire, they are really doing it in a commonsensical way. So when we're talking about anger, for example, they say, like, okay, anger, why would you be angry? It's not useful to be angry. Usually you're hurting yourself with that. So don't do that. But there are some times that anger is useful, okay? Usually it's not useful, right? Okay, so that's a really different way of approaching this. Right? I was talking about, like, you have to become reasonable to be part of the bigger universe. They're not talking about those kind of things, modern Stoics. They say, like, anger is just not useful. Sadness is not useful. Jealousy, it's not useful. Why would you do that? Okay, so that's really commonsensical, very pragmatical. So they are taking over this idea of emotions, or passions rather, because not every emotion, but passions, that they are wrong to have, but they have a completely different reasoning behind it. Maybe it makes sense, let's say it like that. Maybe it makes sense because, to say to people like, okay, become part of this greater universe, this greater reason, is difficult, but this is really easy to say, yes. Passions, yeah. Okay, so the question is, what is my definition of passions in here? Indeed, it is different than we usually think about it. So for us, emotions is something different than the pate, actually, in Greek, or Seneca in Latin calls it an affectus. It is something different. What the Stoics see as a passion is something that first comes to you. So let's say you become really sad about something. You hear something, you're starting to cry. That's not an emotion yet for the Stoics. But if you afterwards start crying and then think, yeah, this is really unfair, what happened to me, then it becomes an emotion. Okay, so the first one is like the first hiccup, you would say. And you cannot control that. The Stoics also say that. You cannot control if you feel this surge of anger coming up, or if you are starting to blush. You cannot control that. But if you afterwards confirm that with your thinking, then it becomes an emotion. Okay? So it's not quite the same as an emotion in modern day, and it might also change the way that you think about what Stoics say about emotions, because I think it's more reasonable to agree, like, okay, yeah, we have this surge of anger, but yeah, it is good to think about, like, okay, is it actually reasonable that I'm angry now? Could I actually do it better in a different way? And then I think if I am being this practical as well, that probably 99 of 100 times you will say, like, yeah, maybe I can do it in a better way. Yes, did you want to say something? Or not? Oh, sorry. I thought you wanted to. Okay, yeah.
So would you say that ancient Stoicism had more bearing to earlier philosophical concepts and also the prevailing time period as opposed to Stoicism now?
Yeah.
Because it is below surface level. It's more use it to solve a problem.
Very good. Yeah, that is. I think when I read that, that was definitely what I saw all of the time. And the question is, of course, is that bad? Well, that is up to the reader, I guess. But yeah, it is way more pragmatical. So the question was, like, is it more pragmatical? Is it more like surface level, and the other one more deep philosophical? Yeah, for sure. But like I said as well, it's only a 5 to 10-year-old philosophy, right? They have some time to make it a bit more deep. Okay, quickly through the other ones because it's pretty much the same. Action, when we're talking about the attention area of action, right, in living in harmony and stuff like that, then it's mainly about thinking about your thoughts again. Like, okay, how can I become more effective at things? You really see when they are quoting ancient Stoics who are talking about harmony, that they reframe it in a way like, okay, you're doing things ineffectively now, but actually it's more effective if you think about others as well. So you see this pragmatical side again. And to ascend, I said that for ancient Stoics, ascent is like the pinnacle of their philosophy. It's when you have gone through all of the other phases. Well, that's not the case at all for modern Stoics. They always say, like, you know, this is just an advice, but think about it the way you want. If you think this is nonsense, then fine, do something else. There are more ways to get there. See the huge difference where the ancient Stoics say you can do a judgment at the end. They take the reader to be autonomous from the beginning. Right, so those are some of the differences in there. Okay, so I have noted 4 important shifts that I see in modern Stoicism and in ancient Stoicism. And those shifts are actually not that easy to pin down all of the time, and that is because of this big, long time in between. Those are some things that were happening for a long time that we see back in Stoicism. Right? Some of those things already happened in the 1700s, but you still see it back now. What do I mean with that? We are more individualistic now, the first one. Okay, so the ancient Stoics, for them it was normal to think it was, that you didn't even have to reason that you were part of a group. Right? I think some of us can even remember this when you were naturally part of a group, naturally part of a denomination, of a religious group or something like that. And that formed your identity, right? So this analysis has been made a lot of times that we're now individualistic, so I'm not going to do that. I would like to say there's a positive and a negative about that. The positive is, well, we can actually make our own lives. You can become the person you want way better than in those group-centered societies. The negative side is that you maybe lose some bonding with each other. Right? The second one is in modern Stoicism, I see what I call the economic meritocracy in there. So meritocracy is you are valued based on what you have achieved. And in our modern society, we often do that economically, by how much you earn, what kind of job you have, and stuff like that. So I see that back in modern Stoicism, that this is important, something that was way less important for the ancient Stoics. Why? Because of what we talked about, you just had your role in society. So this wasn't part of it. So you didn't always strive for being more successful. And modern Stoicism, I often say it's like trying to get ahead of your competition a bit. So they give you some tips, some good advice, so you can outsmart your opponent, so you get that job, so that you are the successful entrepreneur. Right? But actually, what they're doing with that is also that they're saying like, okay, often it's used as a way that you won't get burned out because you're not going to think about the things that are not in your power, but then you're even focusing even more on the things that are in your power, and then you're even more responsible for failing if you don't. So I would say modern Stoicism sometimes even makes you more stressed out if you're going to do that, because you're even more focused on yourself. Okay, the third one, the ancient Stoics, they were striving to be the best person that you can be. So they say what sets us apart from, what sets humans apart from other beings is our reason capacity, right? And so we need to try to be as reasonable as possible. In modern day Stoicism, you see what we all, I think, agree with in our society is that authenticity is way more important. So not that you are going to be the best version of yourself, but maybe the most true to yourself. So nowadays we would say like, you know what, in the mornings, you don't have to speak to me. I'm always annoyed then. Then we say like, yeah, that's good that you say it, be yourself. The ancient Stoic would say like, no, work on that, right? That's the difference. Lastly, very briefly, the changing role of truth, and this is actually an important one. Ancient Stoics say that you can find truth right at the very end of your education. Normal people like us, we are not actually able to grasp the truth because, you know, we have our emotions flowing over us, we have the wrong desires, we're not thinking in benevolence for others. So we cannot do that. But nowadays we say like, yeah, truth is there for everyone. Truth is not dependent on the person that is saying it. Okay, so you might see this like if you have a climate change discussion with someone who is really in their emotions. An ancient Stoic would say like, yeah, that's a good example of why it doesn't work that everyone has a claim to the truth. Because you first need to become a good person to use the facts in a good way. For us nowadays, that's not the case anymore. You might want to think about that, what this means for your study, for example, the way where you're working in. What would change if you would say like, okay, you actually need to be a good person who's, you know, has the right desires, who's thinking in benevolence for all. What would that change? I think that quite a lot could change. Okay, I see that we're almost at the end already. Okay, I think we've talked about this, so it's way more pragmatical. I do want to talk a little bit about what does it matter. Is it okay if I go 5 minutes for that? What does it actually matter? Okay, so what? It's more pragmatical. Okay, so first of all, my research wasn't there to say like, okay, ancient Stoicism or modern Stoicism is better. They're there for different purposes, for different people. Both of them can be useful. But it can be dangerous sometimes if we take it too much at surface value without studying it good enough. And the risk of that we can see in two branches of Stoicism. Maybe you've heard of this, Broicism and Stoicism with a dollar sign. This is especially, the last one is especially popular in the Silicon Valley, for example. And what does it mean? Broicism is, well, if you know Andrew Tate, then probably you know some of the things that Broicism is saying. So it's very traditional, conservative type of Stoicism. Stoicism with a dollar sign is like, okay, how can we make as much money as possible, and we can use some Stoic principles for that. And there are some examples in The Obstacle is the Way that I think show where the danger lies in there, and what you should try to avoid, I think, if you are a Stoic. So in The Obstacle is the Way, the author writes about George Clooney. He takes all kinds of examples, of modern day examples of people who are very Stoic. So George Clooney is one of them. Why? Because he started off as an actor and he always tried to please the ones he auditioned for, and he never got the job, he never got the role. Then at some point he became really Stoic, Ryan Holiday says, the author. And what he did was like, I'm not going to depend on what they want, but I'm going to show like, okay, here I am the one you need to have. He came in full of confidence, and see now, he worked as a pizza deliverer back then, and now he's like this really famous actor nowadays. So you see Stoic principles work. Well, if you've listened to what I just said, this is pretty much everything Stoicism is not. You're striving for fame, for money, stuff like that. You know, I can see why he's doing that. Like, okay, we need to have some good example that people like. But yeah, you're not really doing what Stoics would say, like, is the right. You're not really. Is he a good person because of that? I don't know. Maybe he is, but it's definitely not because of that. Yes. We can talk about that later. Okay. Yeah. Because I am running out of time now, and I want to finish this one. Another really great example of the danger, and here we get to a bit of Broicism, is he took the example of Arthur Ashe. It was a tennis player, a black tennis player, in the 70s, I think it was. And what Ryan Holiday says is like, you know, he's a really good example of someone who's stoic. You know, it wasn't good. Life wasn't good for blacks back then, but you know what? He just focused on what he needed to do, and he became successful anyway. He became one of the best tennis players, etc. Okay, and so I would say this is almost racist here. Because, you know, he's not acknowledging like, okay, maybe Arthur Ashe is really a talented tennis player, but there are tons of people who are not. Yeah, they can be stoic. Shouldn't he address the thing that is happening there in the US at that point? Right? Like, okay, yeah, it's good that Arthur Ashe, despite those circumstances, managed to be successful, but is that the thing you want to stress? Like, okay, black people could also be successful back then, almost implying like, okay, so if you were not successful, yeah, that's pretty much your own fault, right? You could have been stoic. Same thing for Hurricane Carter. It was a boxer. Bob Dylan also named a song after him, a song called Hurricane. A boxer who was wrongly accused of murdering someone, where actually two white people did it. And so he also said like he was very stoic about it, and that's why he came out better. Or maybe he should have addressed something else there, not say like, okay, you know, wrongfully accused, you know, you can still be stoic, it's fine. You know, that's not really what it's about. He even has the example of Erwin Rommel in there. Don't know if people heard about him, but he was a general, military general, a Nazi military general. So yeah, that was, and he's saying like, yeah, he was actually not that into Nazism, but yeah, he was especially he liked war, so, and he did that really well, so he's a really good stoic example, yeah. Then it gets a bit tricky, I guess. But that all comes from not knowing the context well enough, right? Not seeing that actually George Clooney, that Stoics actually thought like you need to be a good person. There's like one type of life, and not, you know, you can choose your own life as long as you're good at it. What modern Stoics say about it. All right, I'm going to skip over this. I want to end with this one. Seneca. He said this in his letters to Lucilius, or letters to a Stoic, as it is called in English. And he said, for us, for nowadays, if you want to be a Stoic, men who have made these discoveries, so natural discoveries, whatever discoveries, before us, are not our masters, they are our guides. So we don't have to follow them all of the time. Seneca is also saying we don't have to follow Seneca all the time. The truth lies open for all. It has not yet been monopolized. There is plenty of it left for future generations to discover. So also the Stoics said, please discuss what we have been saying. Please discover more. We don't know the truth. Seneca says all the time, this is what I can do with my knowledge. But don't quote me like I am a master. I'm a guide. You can see and match your thoughts with mine. Take me seriously, but form your own opinion. All right, that's what I wanted to say for now. Thank you very much. Are there any questions? You can read some exercises if you want in the meantime. Or any comments to this?
Thank you very much, Michiel Buis, for this clarifying lecture on the differences between ancient Stoicism and modern-day Stoicism. What I did not understand is why do you think it resonates in modern times so well?
Yeah, so usually what happened with Stoicism was it started to resonate when there was a crisis. Okay, so this happened in multiple times. So first of all, Stoicism, it was founded, if you can call it like that, by Zeno in a crisis, when Alexander the Great had just died and the Greek state fell apart, and everyone didn't know anymore, like, what are our values and stuff like that. It happened in the Roman Empire when it was at its hugest, and people also felt lost. It happened in the 17th century in the Netherlands, actually, where it was really popular. Justus Lipsius is a very important one for that, but there were many more who were influenced by Stoicism during the 80-year War. And it happened again in 2015, 2016, and especially a few years later during COVID. And when I was studying this, I thought, like, okay, yeah, that is the reason why Stoicism is popular now, because, think about what you can control and can't control. We can't control what is happening in the outside world. Focus on what you are doing. And I'm still wondering, like, okay, was that actually the reason why it is popular now? Because it's still in the bookshops. It didn't go away when COVID went away. Well, you might say, well, is that maybe because, the crisis hasn't actually ended? We have a climate crisis, we have a crisis with how we're dealing with each other, we have a crisis overseas with different countries. The crises are keep going. And maybe Stoicism is a way to get a grip on our world again. I mean, this is a very important term that Stoics themselves also use, like, get a grip on your life. Get a grip on yourself, and maybe that is what we need in this time. So maybe that is the one why it is the case.
I can imagine that there are questions from the audience. My colleague will come to you with a microphone so that everyone can hear you in the very top of the room. Yeah. Sorry, David.
Good for your stamina.
Could it also be popular because it's so flexible that it's a philosophy that you can see what you want to see in it? You said that it's applicable to both the right and the left. Is it one of those things that you can see through your own prism and either pick out the bits that you want or interpret in your own way? So it's always popular because you can use it for your own purposes.
Yeah, very good one. Thank you for that. I think that's definitely true, but I didn't want to say it myself because it's a bit cynical as well, right, if you say that. But yeah, definitely, because what modern Stoics often are doing is interpreting a set of quotes that are universally applicable. Like, is there anyone who disagrees that you should focus on the things that are in your control and not on the things that are not in your control? I'd like to see hands for that. I mean, there are just a few quotes. They are really good. There are just, like, Seneca is maybe the best writer, I think, in the ancient times. He's a really good writer. And so he manages to get those sentences out that speak to a lot of people. And yeah, you go on the internet and you see a lot of those quotes, right? And then based on this one quote, we're going to tell you something. You see them everywhere on social media and stuff. And I think, like, they are really good for that. That's definitely something that is influencing it as well. Like, just the writing talents, the way to put that down, and also the gaps that we have from that philosophy, so you can fill them in the way you want to. It's definitely the case. Yeah, very good point.
Other questions? Yes, also there. And maybe you can give back the microphone right after your question so that David can run to the next question.
Is it for me or him?
You can go.
Okay. First of all, thank you for the lecture. It was really, really good. And my question is regarding something you said in the beginning. You said that Stoicism ended up dying off after Marcus Aurelius because of the popularity of Catholicism. And I was wondering, what is the relationship between Stoicism and religion and how it was able to be substituted by Catholicism?
Yeah, very good. Well, the thing mainly is that Stoicism is a philosophy which is about all parts of life. There is a God in Stoicism as well, which is that benevolent God that is going everywhere. It's called the Logos in Stoicism. Well, what happened, it's pretty much also just in general, was that philosophy was not popular anymore. And it was actually, if you were a Stoic, you weren't sure of your life anymore, because everyone needed to be converted to Christianity. Okay, so I said it pretty kindly the first time, but it was often not that kind. It was not a matter of like, okay, Christianity is Stoicism. Well, Christianity is like, it makes more sense to me. No, it was like, okay, Christianity or death. Yeah. So it was, it was often not a voluntary choice. And also, what Christians were really good at was like getting rid of all of those books. So they just weren't available anymore at some point. So they were like, okay, everything needs to be in line with Christianity. Sometimes they said Seneca is a bit in line, so that is why we have a lot of Seneca. Christians, they called Seneca our Seneca, the one who was actually not, he was a heretic, but it was actually pretty Christian already. So in some libraries they kept Seneca, but outside of that, no, please not. Yeah, does that make sense? All right.
You can ask your question and then hand over the microphone to, I think, somewhere in the same row.
Yeah, sure. I think one row under. Okay, so my question is regarding the Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. Do you believe that it's a really good starting point for people who want to enter into Stoicism? And what's your opinion in general about the book?
Yeah. Well, I don't want to go too much into the book, but I will definitely say that Viktor Frankl is in line with Stoicism in a lot of things. He's also inspired by Stoicism, and I would also say, like, yeah, it's a very, very good introduction. It's really fun to read, so yeah, for sure do that. Yeah. Yes?
Hello, Elias. Thanks for the lecture. I was wondering, are you a Stoic? If you could elaborate on that, and if you are, would you swear by it?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm not a Stoic. That's for, especially when I started this research, it was mainly because I was seeing like those Stoic books, and I was like, why are they doing that? But actually, I started to appreciate Stoicism more and more while I was researching this. And what I keep finding out is that it really is a life philosophy. It is about life. It's deep. It has deep truths about life. So as I went on through life events, I saw that Stoicism actually could help me, that it could be a difference. And so it took some time for me to really appreciate Stoicism, but I really do appreciate it by now. And that's not, I mean, it's a bit what Seneca said, like, okay, they can be my guides sometimes, but I do disagree. I think this is just personal, and we can discuss this, but the thing about passions, I mean, I think that irrationality is sometimes really good. That it can really help us, irrationality. That to become really angry about something really sets your moral compass straight sometimes. Right? So it's not always that bad. And it can also be in different ways. Being jealous is maybe also sometimes even good because it sets your priorities straight. You see, like, okay, this actually means something to me. Reason cannot always do that. Right? So those are the times where I feel like, okay, they're maybe a bit too strict on this. And that's where I don't agree. I can give you an example of where it did actually help me a lot. That was when I lost my job. So my contract didn't get renewed where I was working. I got really mad at those people, and I thought, like, okay, yeah, then I'm just, if you're not going to renew my contract, then at this point, I'm going to drop everything, and you can find it out yourself. But then I actually thought about the Stoics. They said, like, okay, yeah, you cannot control it, but you can control how you respond to that. What kind of person do you want to be? So I got actually some joy out of doing things in the right way at that moment, like being a good person at that point. Like, okay, this is a lesson for me. I can learn something from this about who I am and who I want to be. And if I'm going to let my emotions take over, then probably I'm not going to end up being the person I want to be. I want to be the person who does this in the right way, who can look at himself in the mirror, who can look at his colleagues later on again. So then it actually taught me a lot. And that was one of those moments where I saw, like, okay, now it actually means something to me, what they were saying then. Before I thought it was a bit over the top, what they were saying, like, be a good person. then I felt like, okay, yeah, this actually can make you a better, happier person, even at those moments where probably you should feel unhappy. You can be really happy with like, okay, I actually did this in a good way. Okay.
You have the microphone now, right? Yeah.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Thank you for your lecture. I really enjoyed it. And you talked a lot about desire, the physics. How would you say would classical Stoicism tell you how to control your desires? How do you approach this question?
Yeah. So there are many ways to do this. There are a few that I have written down here. So, for example, they become really practical sometimes, right? So, in the evening, this sounds almost Star Wars-like, look back on the day and ask yourself, just reflect on your day and see like, okay, I've been really angry today. Was it actually justified that I was angry at that moment? Is that the kind of person I want to be who is angry at that point? What can I do differently the next time? I would suggest start with small things. Like, you get in a traffic jam and you get really angry about that. And you're annoyed by it. And then later on when you're in your bed and it's all past, say like, was it worth it to get that annoyed with it? What could I do differently next time? Well, maybe I could just do this. Think about this, like, oh, this is funny that I get so annoyed. Well, usually it's gone by then, right? If you do that. So you could think of Stoic principles. Like, okay, everything has to happen the way it happens. I don't have control over it. Why would I be angry then? Why wouldn't I say like, okay, it has to happen like this, then let's say yes to this. Even though it wasn't my choice, but yeah, it wasn't my choice. So let's just say yes, I can choose if I'm happy with what is happening or not. Why would I choose to be not happy with what is happening? Isn't it more reasonable to choose to be happy with it?
There's another question here.
A few things.
Yes, thank you for your seminar. I really enjoyed it. Stoicism, in an ancient sense, is also grounded in the context of the times then. They lived in a polytheistic society and also a very warlike environment where everything can change, and Stoicism was a kind of anchor to keep them straight there. But in modern times, at least in the West, we have relative material comforts, but there's a lot of movement in another sense.
Yeah.
Could you transplant the Stoicism of back then like times now, like nowadays? Just like you pick a flower from one area and you transplant it to another, the soil conditions and etc. need to be the same. Would you say that we can do that?
I would say not. And I would say that Stoicism is relevant today, but it is important to be aware of those things. And modern Stoics often are not aware of that. They just say, like you said, like, okay, we can use this ancient philosophy and apply it immediately nowadays. But I would say, if you're writing a modern Stoic book, think about this. Like, okay, just write it down. This was a very warlike civilization. We don't have that now. What does that mean for the philosophy? Does it mean Stoics often compare life to being a soldier, for example, right? Like you have to run your duty, and you have to do what your commander asks of you, and those kind of talk that they're having. Well, that doesn't resonate in the modern day anymore. Well, maybe in the USA it would. I mean, Stoicism is popular in the USA, and I would say that the military also has quite a big role there. So maybe that's a bit different there. But be aware of those kind of things. Be aware of that we're more individualistic now. Write about it. How can we do it at that moment? And so what modern Stoicism, I think, is lacking is this awareness. This critical thinking of like, okay, where are we now and where were we back then? What is the difference? How can we implement it nowadays? And I think there probably is a way, because there are a lot of truths in Stoicism. We need to become a bit more aware of that before you can really use it as a life philosophy nowadays.
Yeah.
Okay, hi, thank you for your lecture. You mentioned several times that for being a Stoic, you like the thing that you can control is to be a good person and do the things in the right way. But how do you figure out the criteria of being a good person? Like in theory, good,
Yep.
like it doesn't make sense, or doing it in a right way. What is the right way?
Yeah, yeah. So first of all, it is applying those kind of things, like working on your emotions, only caring about things that are not in your control. There will be moments where you just don't know what is the right thing, right? Stoics say, don't do it on your own at that moment. So if you read the ancient Stoics, they all had a teacher, they were all going to Stoic classes, they were all talking about it with each other, try to find it out together what it is. So, okay, we know the Stoic principles. I am stuck at this moment. I really don't know how I can be a good person at this moment or what I'm doing if it's the right thing. Talk about it with each other. And also, fail. That is what the Stoics were doing as well. Seneca said it himself as well. I'm failing all of the time, but I'm reflecting on it. And I see now, like, this was the wrong thing. How would I do it the next time? Right? And this is what I said, like this practical philosophy. You can be a really good philosopher in theory and know exactly what to do, but then the moment you walk out, you do the wrong thing, right? And so fail, but reflect on it. Try to keep track of it if you're doing something wrong. And then say like, okay, how would I do it next time? And then try to do it like that next time. Maybe next time you'll see that that is also the wrong way. Do it again in a different way. Right? The Stoics actually said no one will be perfect in the end. Very few people will reach that. Like Seneca said, maybe one in a generation out of all of the millions of people. Maybe one will reach that. The rest of us, yeah, we will keep failing. But you can become maybe a bit of a better person. Maybe we should call it like that instead of a good person. A bit of a better person. Yeah?
There was one question here in the middle, and then you, and I think that our time is over then. I see many more other hands, but you can ask maybe your questions here at the front afterwards. You go.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. The part about the modern Stoicism was that the desire, how you use it, is only when it's useful to you. So anger, sadness, that is not a useful emotion. And I can also see that that may be pragmatically kind of turned off while they leave happiness and joy and pride and stuff like that. But how did the ancient Stoics feel about, or not feel about, like rationalize the positive emotions?
Yeah, very good. So we indeed only talked about the negative emotions. But what if you're happy about something that happened? Well, it depends on what kind of happiness you are experiencing. If, for example, you have been striving to be wealthy all of the time, and you won €1,000,000, and you're really happy about that, that's the wrong kind of happiness, because you're happy about something that is not within your power. But if you're really happy because you did not join the lottery and you did not win anything, and that's the way it had to happen, and you're happy about it, that's the right kind of happiness. Right? So, and they call this, they have a different word for this. So the wrong ones, they are the passions, and they would say the good emotions, so based on being a reasonable person, being happy with what is happening, being in accordance with nature, they're called eupaiteia, is what they call them. So good passions. Eu is good in Greek. So they are there, but you need to be really careful with them, because as long as you have emotions, you don't really know for sure if that happy emotion you're having, if that is based on the right thing, or if it is based on some wrong desire anyway. So they say, like, try to avoid them altogether in the beginning, because you cannot trust yourself really. But there are definitely good ways to be happy, to have positive emotions.
Sorry, the microphone was actually for someone but you ask your question and then hand it over right away. Maybe he can answer the two questions.
Yeah, you're still in time for Feyenoord,
Okay.
I think. Yeah.
So my question is, I noticed there's a lot of parallels between Stoicism and Buddhism or Eastern philosophies, but one is nowadays associated with productivities and work, while the other is Zen and relaxation. Like both are about good people living in harmony with nature, but one now completely has a different branding than the other. So how come?
Yeah. So very
Sorry,
good.
maybe you can ask your question now and then you can answer the two.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was just curious more about like the more perspectives and how Stoicism deals with like negative emotions.
Okay.
Because I think during the lecture you also said sometimes that it was like more like useless, but you also mentioned like irrationality can be useful as well, and also you also said about like anger as a motivator. So I'm just curious more about like maybe more in-depth perspectives of Stoicism about emotions, negative emotions, and how to deal with them. And also I still don't get the living in harmony with the nature. So
Yeah, I didn't
thank
really
you.
get to that. Yeah, I thought it was would come back, and indeed, you're very right that we didn't talk about it too much. Okay, so let me first start off with Buddhism and Stoicism. Indeed, they are really very similar to each other. But what I would say is what is happening in Buddhism, which is different in Stoicism, is the idea of non-thinking. Let's put it like that. Right? So in meditation, you're trying to, not think, get out of the rationality. Whereas Stoics say, like, okay, we need our rationality in there. Very broad strokes. So I would say that Stoicism is how I call it. It's like Buddhism for the Western world. The things that we don't really understand about Buddhism, which is this sometimes this meditation type of thing, or becoming one with nature, understanding that you are not separate from everything around you, but that it's all a whole. That are the things that probably in most of Western civilization we don't get about Buddhism. Why? Because it is so much. It has so much. It is indebted to reason, and so Stoicism, I would say, is like a bit of a Buddhism for Western people, where reason is more important, is the way to get out of suffering instead of understanding this non-reason part. It's a bit short, sorry, but I hope that you can do something with that. What was your question about negative emotions, a bit more in depth? Well, I would say, what is their idea about negative emotion? They say, let's take anger as an example again. There is nothing that you can do without anger that anger can do. But probably you're going to do it more rational. Okay, so they say anger can, can put things in perspective. It can actually be a motivator. They would say, well, can't you also do that with reason? Why not? I mean, maybe for me it works because I'm not a Stoic yet, and I haven't mastered my emotions. They say like everything that you can do with anger, you can also do it without anger. And actually there is a lot more that you can do without anger, because with anger you are going to destruct things as well. Was there one more thing that you said? Living with nature. Okay. So living with nature is, very briefly, understanding your human nature. What do you need as a human being? Okay, so that is what are your desires, but it's also living simply. Do we need all of the luxury that we're having? Do we need to have this great meal that costs a lot and stuff like that? Do we need the newest fashion, stuff like that? Think about it when you are setting your priorities. What do I actually need as a human being? 2, living in a harmony with nature is, what do I need with my social nature? What does my social nature tell me? How do I live as a social being with others? How do I look at it from the bigger picture? And 3rd, living in harmony with the cosmos. Okay, so then we get a bit to the climate change thing. It is like accepting the way the cosmos works, being thankful for the way the cosmos works, even when it's not that good for you as an individual, but you're part of this bigger whole. And you're grateful for being this bigger whole, part of this bigger whole. Okay, so those are the 3 dimensions that you can use. And this is also really good to think about, right? Okay, what do I need as an individual human? What did I do right in that way today? What do I need as a social being? What do I need as being a part of the cosmos? Okay? Very briefly.
There was a question up there.
Thank you. I found your comparison between classic and modern Stoicism very interesting. And you emphasized a couple of times that modern Stoicism is still at a nascent stage. So, you know, the people who've been writing so far are only really starting to develop this. So I would love to hear from you, being bold, where should modern Stoicism go next? If you were writing the book to further modern Stoicism, what is your thesis?
Actually, in 2 months, my book comes out, so it's a good way to promote that as well. Yeah. So, no, the way I think about this is, so there are 3 areas of Stoic education, right? We talked about it now, the desire, action, and assent. And I was actually thinking, like, I mean, this gets a bit Rudolf Steiner-like, that we are actually collectively with New Stoicism in this desire area. So usually it is about what is in your control and not, do you have the right desires? And so this first 10 years was like the age of desire for New Stoicism. We were rediscovering that philosophy, and that's the first part of your education. But yeah, now we can expand. We had this first part, and actually you're starting to see that as well in modern Stoicism, that there are writers who say like, yeah, is this everything there is to Stoicism? No, there's actually more. Let's write books about that, including me, right? But there are other and better writers who are also doing that. And so they are going towards like, okay, but actually you're not an island. You're not just an individual. You're part of a bigger society. So let's include that as well. And then lastly, hopefully we will also get to the age of assent, where we're going to, I hope, but I think this is really interesting if we would do that, if we were actually going to do this with science, for example. I mean, this is a thought. Think about it if you think it makes sense. I was thinking it's really interesting if we are going to do science in a Stoic way. So if we are going to, first of all, learn to control our desires as a scientist, for example. If you're going to start, you have the right desires. So you're not doing science because you want to get rich, not doing science because you want to help a company become more successful or whatever. You have the right desires. You have the right types of actions or intentions. So you're looking towards the whole, and you're looking towards benevolence for everyone. And then you're going to interpret nature. We have science out there, we have facts out there. And what if you interpret it with a Stoic lens? If you're going to do it with the right desires and thinking of the greater good, what will happen then? I think it's really interesting if we were going to do that. I think that this is a really nice challenge for modern Stoics, to see like, okay, does that bring us anywhere if we do that? If we're going to reinterpret the things we know, scientists often say like, you know what, I'm just here about the facts and I'm going to describe them. But what if you have an actual good person doing this and interpreting what is before them?
Germans tried it and failed. We don't want to repeat that.
Okay, yeah, well, that might be one bad example of that. Who knows if there are good examples of that. I'm not talking about a naturalistic fallacy. I know what you're talking about, but, it needs to be actually good people. I don't think the Germans were actually good people, but yeah. But I get your point.
There's room for one last question,
Okay.
and you were asking me.
Yes. Thank you very much for the presentation. You were looking for persons who have practical value of Stoicism. I'm handicapped because of incurable disease, but I'm, instead of the beginning, just positive in life. And actually, I went to this meeting because actually what I'm doing is Stoicism.
Yeah.
I look what I can influence, the cause of my disease, if I get limitations, trying to find out what can help me. I never hope to get in a wheelchair. I'm very happy I've got one.
No.
Because I have a totally different attitude. No. And for the rest, I just try to live. No. Make life wonderful. So if you, I've got also a book about it. I will give you my business card. If you are just interested to look at it.
Yeah, sure.
I'm a technician. I'm totally not interested in discussion about psychology. But if you think, hey, it might be interesting to hear.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, or if there are students who want to more know about it. It's the website genietenmetbeperking.nl.
Yeah, if you would tell me that afterwards, then I will definitely. And I think it might be a good way to end this. So thank you for sharing that, first of all. And I think it is something that I hear more often, is when a lot of people actually think here probably like, oh yeah, Stoicism, that's actually easy to say when you are in good health, like accept everything. But yeah, you don't know what it is if you are really ill. But what you're saying is what I hear more often, is that this is actually something that is empowering if you are ill. That you feel like, okay, but actually this part, this is what I can control, and this is what is important. All of the things maybe that I thought that were important, they fall away now. And that it might even be good if you see now for yourself, like, okay, yeah, I am part of this bigger whole. I have been able to walk here for a while. And I'm grateful for that I have been. And maybe I'm even happy that I can be part of this cycle as well, this everlasting cycle that keeps going. I'm part of nature. I'm part of everything that is here. You are part of that now. And by realizing you're even more that. So I think that, and that's why I think it is good that maybe you're the last person who asked a question here, so that maybe you can be an inspiration for that as well. Like, okay, it is not easy to say if you're healthy. It is actually something that sticks with you in life events, like my life event of losing my job is a small one like that, but can also be for bigger events. Thank you for sharing that, and please come to me.
Thank you all for being here tonight and for all your questions. Can I have one hand of applause for Dr. Michiel Buis?